Happy Pesach and a good Moed to everyone. Today is the 18th of Nisan. It's the second day of Chol HaMoed. It is the fifth day of Pesach, the fourth day of Pesach. And we have opportunities to study Torah, each from our home or from our location, and all together uniting around the world through the power of social media. Today's subject is tolerating tolerance. Does a Torah of absolute values tolerate tolerance? So the first question for us is this. The Torah is very clear about what is right and is also very clear about what is wrong. There are many people who have all kinds of ideas about what is right and what is wrong. In the contemporary value system, the idea is live and let live. There are multiple ways of thinking about right and wrong, and what's right for one is not necessarily right for the other. And the question that we have to address for ourselves is, if I believe in the Torah and I believe that things are absolutely correct or absolutely incorrect, then how do I deal with someone else that I encounter who has a view that is different from the Torah's view? I'm not talking about a view that is different from my view, but a view that is different from the Torah's view. Does a Torah of absolute values have tolerance for tolerance? Well, let's begin by positing a very important piece, and that is that the Torah never negates people, the Torah negates ideas. And one of the very big misconceptions we have is that in order to embrace a person, we need to embrace their ideas. And if I cannot embrace their idea, then I cannot value the person. So in order to value the person, I need to value and embrace their ideas. To tolerate people, I need to tolerate their opinions. While the Torah is very quick to separate people from their opinions, while the Torah is very strict about what is right and what is wrong, the Torah is very generous and very open and very embracing of all people, no matter what they think. And so the idea that I can tolerate people, even if I disagree with their opinions, is the foundational fact for the lesson today. It enables us to socialize with people that we disagree with. It enables us to befriend people that we disagree with. And it enables us to overcome these boundaries even within our families. Very often you have families that have great discord between them. One is Republican and the other is Democrat. One is liberal and the other is conservative. And when they get around the table, they end up having all these conflicts, and then they end up having enmity between each other. Brothers get pulled apart because they disagree on certain subjects. And the Torah would come and tell us, don't push your brother away just because you disagree with your brother on a particular point. Your brother is your brother, and your disagreements are entirely irrelevant to the fact that you and the person you disagree with are brothers. If we can expand that to the entire nation and to all of humanity, then we can recognize the importance of embracing people even when we disagree with their opinions. That's a very critical piece. Let me start with a little story that they tell. There was a rabbi on a train, and he was sitting in the first class cabin on the train, and he was smoking a cigarette. A lady comes up to him and says, Rabbi, you probably don't read in English, but there is a sign behind you. It says no smoking. Why are you smoking in the train? So the rabbi looks at the lady and says, excuse me, lady, why do you presume to tell me what to do in first class when you have a third class ticket? You don't even belong here, let alone dictate to people in first class. But the lady got offended and she ran to the inspector and she brings him over to the rabbi and she says, excuse me, Inspector, the rabbi, he's smoking in a no smoking car. The rabbi turns to the inspector and says, lady, sir, with all due respect, this lady doesn't even belong here. Examine her ticket. You'll see she's got a third class ticket and she's sitting in a first class room. The inspector examines her ticket and shamefacedly, the lady admits and she gets banished from the first class car. When the train arrives at the destination, all the passengers leave the train and the rabbi and the lady meet up on the platform. And the lady says, Rabbi, you were right. I was a third class ticket holder. But tell me, Rabbi, please, how did you know? And the rabbi says, lady, it's quite simple. Your ticket was sticking out of your pocket, and I noticed that the color of your ticket, it's the same color as my ticket. So if you think about it, that is true about most of the people we disagree with. The color of their ticket is the same color as my ticket. They might have certain opinions that are right or wrong. It doesn't make them good or bad. I often hear people say, oh, that's a bad Jew, because that's a Jew that says things I cannot possibly tolerate. Well, I might say that that's an incorrect opinion, but I wouldn't say that's a bad Jew. Just because somebody has opinions that in my view are bad doesn't make them bad. So does a Torah of absolute values tolerate tolerance? The quick right off the bat answer is absolutely so. It tolerates the people, no matter what opinions they hold. If we could embrace that in contemporary society, it would really take a lot of pressure off of all of us. Because we always try to twist ourselves into pretzels so that we shouldn't offend people who hold opinions that we disagree with. And so we do our best to either be polite about the disagreement, or we do our best to make sure we never voice disagreement, or even worse, we make sure to voice agreement even when we disagree. All in the effort to show respect and tolerance. But if we only realize that respect and tolerance is for the person and not necessarily for the opinion, then we would have a path forward to a tolerance without worrying so much about the fact that you and I disagree. God created us in ways that we don't all think in the same way, and that's a good thing. God wanted us to each think in a unique way. This way we can each contribute to the conversation. If you agreed with me in everything you did, then it would be a very vanilla kind of world and would have no interest in living in this world. The fact that you think your way and I think my way is not offensive. It's just the way things ought to be. It enriches our life experience. I have a contribution and so do you. The fact that they aren't the same contributions is not offensive. It's just different takes on the same matter. I will say that you're completely wrong. You might say I'm completely right, but I totally embrace you as an individual, as a human being, as a person of intelligence, because that's what you are. You are a spark of God, just like I am a spark of God. So, as we launch this conversation after this initial introduction, let me tell you that I'm going to talk about 4 different subjects today. I'm going to touch for a few minutes on judging people favorably. And then I'm going to touch for a few minutes on the subject of being a mensch. And if you're watching this, I'm assuming you know what that means. Then I'm going to touch on the subject of actually tolerating views and opinions when you actually can tolerate the view, when it's different from yours but not categorically wrong. And then we'll talk about treating people respectfully. At the end, we'll conclude with not allowing tolerance to become weakness. So let's launch right into it and talk about judging favorably. More often than not, when it comes to an issue of intolerance, it's because we've judged the person for their opinion. Often it's also because we judge a person for something we've seen them do, and we jump to conclusions about why they did it. We hear something they said, and we make assumptions about what they thought. So the first thing that the Mishnah teaches us is always judge another person favorably. They say, don't judge another until you've walked a mile in his shoes. Why? Because number one, you've got his shoes. And number two, he's a mile away from you, so how is he going to catch up with you? But in all seriousness, the Mishnah says, don't judge another until you've been in his place. Do you know what drives them to their view? Do you know what inspired them to that behavior? We really don't know. They tell a story about 2 elderly women that lived across the road from a house of ill repute. And they sat on their front porch and they knew the clientele. They watched them come in and out every day. But one day, to their absolute surprise, along comes the Catholic priest and he sneaks down the street and he looks to the right and he looks to the left and no one's watching. So he sneaks into the house of ill repute. And one of these Jewish women says to her friend, it's so sad to see a man of the collar go sour. The next day they're sitting on the porch and they see a Protestant minister sneaking down the street, looking right, looking left, no one's looking, sneaks into the house, and one turns to the other and said, "Oh, so sad to see a man of God go bad." The next day they're sitting on their front porch and they see their own rabbi sneaking down the street. He's looking right, he's looking left, no one's noticing. He slips into the house of ill repute. And the lady turns to her friend and says, "Ah, one of the girls over across the street must be really sick." That's what it means to judge favorably. I don't know why the priest went in. I don't know why the minister went in. I don't know why the rabbi went in. But why assume that they went in for the most logical reason, since they are a person of integrity? Maybe they went in for good reasons. You never know. I was once lecturing on this topic in California, in Los Angeles, and a man came up to me after I was finished and he told me his personal story. With his permission, I'm going to share it with you. His mother worked very hard, but somehow her older brother always denigrated her, and she often was left in tears after conversations with her older brother. So the boy was always, as a boy, he was always very disturbed by the fact that his uncle always left his mother in tears. So one day he decided that he would walk up to his uncle, now that he was 12 or 13, and he would literally threaten him with violence the next time he made his mom cry. And sure enough, it worked. His uncle never realized that his mom was so disturbed by all of this. And so the next few years, his uncle never really made his mom cry, and he felt good about it. But then when he was maybe 16 or 17, I'm not sure what age, disaster struck. His father died. And they were sitting in the chapel, and they were there at the front bench. He was sitting on the second bench. His mom was at the front bench, and his uncle walks in. And he bends low and he whispers into his mother's ears. And then he steps away and his mother bursts into uncontrollable tears. And he's seething. At my dad's funeral, he had to say something to make my mother feel so distressed. He resolved that he was going to keep his word. He had promised his uncle he would beat him up if he ever made his mom cry. By God, he would beat him up that night. They went home after the service. They had a reception, as one usually does. And then after the reception, the house emptied and only the uncle, the mom, and he were home. He finds the uncle in a corner in a side room. He throws him up against the wall. He says, "I told you never to make my mom cry again. And you had the audacity to do this at my dad's funeral." He punches him in the face. He kicks him. He beats him. His uncle is bloodied. His uncle is swollen. His uncle says, "What are you doing? I didn't say anything to your mom." He says, "Yes, you did. Mom was crying. Get out of this house and never come back." And his uncle left, saying not another word to him. He walks into the living room and his mom is there. And his mom says, "Hey, sweetie, what's the matter? I can see you're upset." He says, "No, Mom, everything's fine. Everything's fine." A little while later, he walked up to his mom and he said, "Mom, what did your brother say to you to make you cry?" And she said, "Nothing, honey. He just said, 'You've raised your son so well, your husband would be proud of you.'" 1 week later, his mom passed away. Had he never asked her, he would never have known what his uncle had done, what his uncle had said. He never would have been able to judge his uncle favorably. It was a great thing that he had had the opportunity to ask, because he had judged his uncle for something that he really was not guilty of. And that's really a message that we should all take to heart. When we see something that's unfavorable about someone else, don't judge them. If you hear an opinion from someone that you think is categorically wrong, don't judge the person. You have no idea what their life experience is. You don't have no idea what their background is. You have no idea why they've come to this conclusion. And you have no idea if you would have come to a similar conclusion had you been subjected to the same experiences that that person has been subjected to. When we see something about another, we can disagree with their behavior, we can disagree with their words, we could never disagree with their person. We separate the opinion from the person. It works wonders. The Talmud tells a story about a great rabbinical sage. He was traveling And he looks over and he sees this fellow who was incredibly despicable. He was ugly. He was awful to look at. And he said to himself, almost like mumbling, he observes to himself, "Oh, how despicable is this man." The man heard him. He says, "Excuse me, sir, what did you say?" Well, when he heard what the rabbi had said, the man simply observed, "Why don't you go talk to the craftsman who made me? Go talk to God." As soon as the rabbi heard that, he jumped off of his horse and he begged the man for forgiveness. At first, the man refused to forgive him, but in the end, the story goes on, the man eventually did forgive. What actually happened here? The Lubavitcher Rebbe explained what was going on here. The Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory, whose father's birthday is actually today, and I believe there was a lecture about it earlier today on this page. The Lubavitcher Rebbe explained, when this rabbi said that the man is despicable, he wasn't talking about his outer appearance. He was talking about his inner personality, his character. The ancient sages had this keen insight into human nature, and they could, at a glance, take in the soul of a person, one's character, one's defects. And he said, what a despicable character. The man came up to him and said, if you can't find anything redeeming about me, then go ask God why he made me. Maybe you're not looking at me the way God looks at me. Because you know what? If God made me, he must have had reason to make a despicable character like me. There's something unique and specific that only I can do that no one else can. Let's put it this way. If I can do everything you can do, then why did God make you? He already has me. And if you can do everything I can do, then why did God make me? He's got you. If he made you and he made me, then that's proof positive that he saw something that only you can do, and he saw something only I can do. If I look at you and I can't find anything nice about you or anything redeeming about you, then I'm not looking the right way. I need to look at you the way God looks at you. He saw fit to create you. He sees fit to nurture you. He sees fit to sustain you, to keep you alive, to provide you with oxygen every day, with food and with drink, with a house and shelter and clothing. He obviously sees a purpose for your being. If I can't see it, I need to look a little differently. There's a concept called Vayisa Einav. You lift your eyes. Vayar, then you see. The soothsayer Balaam, who was hired by the king of Moab to curse the Jewish people in the biblical story, ended up giving them blessings. Before he blessed them, the Torah says, Vayisa Einav, Balaam the soothsayer, who was a terrible anti-Semite, who did his best to curse the Jews, but he lifted his eyes. Vayar, and he saw something positive about the Jews. He saw that the way they arrayed their tents was very modest, where one doorway of the tent was not directed opposite the doorway of the tent across it, so that people in one tent couldn't look into the other tent. They were all at an angle, so they couldn't see into each other's homes. A very modest way of arraying the tents. He saw something positive about them, and then he said the famous words, Matovu ohalecha Yaakov, how beautiful are your tents, Jacob, Mishkenotecha Yisrael, your dwelling place is Israel. What happened? What made Balaam suddenly notice something positive about the Jewish people, about whom he could not see anything redemptive, and he wanted to curse them out of existence? The difference was Vayisa Einav, he lifted his eyes. Vayar, then he suddenly saw Yisrael Shochein Lishvatav, the Jewish people were dwelling each within their tribal plots, each within their tribal lots, but arrayed in a way that was so modestly situated. If we look at someone and can't see anything good to say about them, we need to look differently. We need to lift our eyes, take a higher perspective, look at them the way God looks at them. There's got to be something redeeming and positive about them. Before I judge them negatively, I need to judge them favorably, because that's how God does. You know, we're very, very good at judging people favorably. You know how we know that? Because we are good at judging ourselves favorably. We don't see our own faults. We certainly don't look for them. And when we happen to run into them, we often deny them. We overlook them. We focus on our strengths. All in all, yeah, I've got faults, but so does everybody else. On the balance, I'm a pretty good person. I've got a lot of strengths, and that's what I choose to focus on. When I look at someone else, I have the option of doing the same. Do you know why I overlook my faults and overlook your strengths? Because I love me. And our sages tell us, Al kol psha'im tichaseh ahava. Love will conceal all faults. If I love myself, I won't zero in on my faults. You know what the problem is? I don't love you as much as I love me. That's why your faults, they show up in my eyes, and my faults don't. If I look at you and I see nothing good, then I need to change the way I look at you. I need to look at you with more love. The way I look at myself. The way I look at the person I choose to marry. There's this classic dispute in the Talmud about what to say to a bride when you come to her wedding and you can't find anything nice to say about her. So Bet Shammai said, well, just say the generic line that the bride is beautiful and kind. That's all. Don't say anything more. Bet Hillel says, no, you know what? Sorry, Bet Hillel says, say the bride is beautiful and kind. Bet Shammai says, no, say it's a bride as she is. Bet Shammai says, don't lie about it. Don't exaggerate your opinion of the truth. Bet Hillel says, you're not exaggerating anything here. You're simply talking about her the way her husband sees her. If you can't find anything redeeming in her, the fault is in you. Her husband obviously finds something redeeming about her because he married her. Well, if you say beautiful things about her, then you are saying what her husband is seeing. That's not a lie. It's a matter of perspective. It's not my perspective, but it is a truism as perceived by the husband. So if God can see us differently, if our loved ones can see us differently, if we can see ourselves differently, then we can find it within ourselves to see others around us who we might otherwise judge unfavorably in a positive light. So when you come across, we are going to sum up the judge favorably piece. When you come across someone who holds an opinion that you find despicable and categorically wrong, who behaves in a way that you find offensive and terribly boorish, who says things that are incredibly impolite and totally unjustified, before you judge the person, try and take a positive look. Because if you gain insight, gain some kind of perspective about what's going on inside, you might have an entirely different opinion about this person. And even if you can't find anything good, then Se'u marom einechem. Lift your eyes above and try and see this person the way God does. So that brings us to the end of the first section of judging favorably. And now let's move on to treating with respect. Suppose you have not succeeded in finding anything favorable to say about this person or to think of this person. You really have nothing good to say. Well, in that case, how do you go forward? Of course, you can make an assumption that there's a lot about this person you don't know, but until you're able to learn more about them, what do? And the answer is simply be civil. Just be a mensch. I remember when Dr. Laura Schlesinger's program, I don't know if she's still on the radio, but her program used to be pumped into Canada through some of the stations here. She no longer is. People would call her and ask her what they should do when one of their friends or family members from a long time ago was making a wedding, but they've had a falling out over the last number of years. Should I go or should I not go? And Dr. Laura would say something that was really surprising in today's society. She would say, go and be civil. Go and be civil. Just because you can't find anything nice to think about someone doesn't mean that you have to be impolite and that you have to be offensive and that you have to be uncomfortable around them. Just go and be polite. You know, there's a particular rabbi of the Reform movement with whom I got along very, very well. And there's a reason for that. It's not because we agreed on many aspects of Judaism. As a Chabad, an Orthodox rabbi, I have my views. As a Reform rabbi, he had his views. But there's one thing I can say about him. I could say many things about him, but the best thing I can say about him is he was simply a mensch. He was a caring individual, empathetic individual, and a polite individual, and truly an honest individual. But he didn't feel the need to be honest about the subjects about which we disagreed. He was always comfortable bringing up subjects on which we had a common view. And that's why we always had very lovely and pleasant conversations. That's why we had such a deep friendship and admiration for one another. Because above all, he was a mensch. He didn't feel the need to put down anything I believed. He didn't feel the need to lord it over me by saying something that he felt he understood better than me. And that's why we got along so well. Some of you on the broadcast here from London, Ontario might recognize I'm talking about Joel Whitstein of blessed memory. He was a paragon of virtue in that respect, a true mensch who is very much missed today in our community. If we can all take a page out of his book and we can behave that way with people that we disagree with, you're sitting around the dining room table on a Shabbat afternoon and someone brings up an opinion with which you vehemently disagree. On a Sunday afternoon in the summer, you're having a backyard barbecue and your neighbor states a perspective, a point of view, an opinion that you think is completely reprehensible. Well, who says you have to pick up on it and continue the conversation and be honest about your opinion? Why don't you just shift the conversation to basketball? Talk about the weather. Talk about family. Talk about anything else. Don't have to focus on the thing that divides you. There are so many other things that unite us. So in addition to the fact that we are all brothers and sisters and we have this internal and intimate link with one another, and we can and have the right and the ability to embrace each other despite our differences, in addition to that, there is a mode of conduct that we ought to take, which is don't dwell on the differences. If you know you have a difference of opinion with someone, don't distance yourself from that someone. Why don't you embrace that someone, practice a little humility, and focus on subjects that you both agree with? That's a very good thing to do as well. Who's to say that you must focus on the things with which you disagree, even if you think that they are categorically wrong? For the most part, when we feel the need to put down someone else's opinion, it's very often because we aren't so secure in our own opinion. The more secure we are in our own shoes, the more comfortable we are with letting others disagree with us. So when we come down hard on another person with whom we disagree, we're really revealing a lot more about ourselves. We're telling everybody how insecure we are in our own opinion, in our own shoes, and need to put other people down in order to lift ourselves up. There's this great story about the Rebbe Maharash, the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Shmuel Schneerson. He observed two of his children having an argument, and one was trying to throw the other down. And he said to them, you know what, he said, if you want to be higher than your brother, you don't need to accomplish that by throwing your brother to the ground. You can accomplish the same thing by stepping up on a chair. If you lift yourself up to a higher level, if you can find that nobility and that grace within yourself to allow the other person their say without needing to reject it, then it'll be a much more pleasant experience and you'll be all the better for it. The more secure we are within ourselves, the better we are around people. You know, everyone enjoys the company of a mensch. It makes us feel good to be in the company of somebody who's menschlich. And for the most part, people think that is because they are pleasant company. They're nice to be around. But that's not really it. What really makes us happy to be in their presence is that they're comfortable with themselves. And when we are in the presence with someone who's comfortable with themselves, we become more comfortable with ourselves. So it's not always necessary to tell somebody that they are bad. In fact, it's often much better to let whatever we disagree with slide and then focus on the things that actually make us good and that actually we have in common with others. There's this, we are in the middle of Pesach, so there's this Jewish law, halacha, about chametz on Pesach, leavened bread on Pesach. And so the rule states the following. One is not permitted to possess chametz during the course of Pesach. But if someone else's chametz is in my home during the course of Pesach, I am not in violation. I don't own that chametz, therefore I'm not in violation even if it's in my home. The Talmud uses a very interesting phrase to express this rule. It says, you may not see your own chametz, but you may see another's chametz. Well, some of the the teachers of Jewish ethics have utilized this line to reframe it in the context of our conversation. We might not see our own faults. Chametz is when the dough inflates, when the dough rises, which is a representation of ego. You might not recognize your own ego and your own faults. Shalcha i'ata ro'eh, you might not see your own, but you certainly do see another's. If you're seeing another's and not your own, it's likely because we are not so secure within ourselves. If we can become more secure within ourselves, we'll find less need to put another down. Let's move on to the third section about tolerating views and opinions. So at this point, I recognize we've been talking about people who have views that are categorically different from ours, to the extent that they might be different from the views the Torah holds. And when it comes to that point, it's not possible for a person who has embraced the Torah values to tolerate opinions that run counter to the Torah, in which case the only option is to tolerate the person and to focus on subjects on which there is agreement. But then even within the realm of Torah endorsed or Torah sanctioned values and opinions, there is a great tent. There's a very wide tent, a great spectrum of opinion. And very often within that tent, there is such vehement disagreement that one puts the other down. And that's a terrible thing. And I'm not just talking about Orthodox groups that are putting each other down. I'm talking about all people. If it comes to a question that is not governed by Torah law, any issue, whether it's a political issue, an environmental issue, an economic issue, the right way to respond to the COVID-19 virus, everybody's got an opinion and everybody's quick to shut down everyone else. And we're quick to criticize our leaders, especially if we belong to the other party. It is a matter that's like a bloodbath out there. We're so quick to jump on other people. In some countries, it's worse than other countries. Under these conditions, it was so lovely to see that recently Canadian political parties all collaborated and came together to vote for a relief package without any kind of inner political squabbles between one another. It was a moment of unity. But very often that unity is sorely lacking in our community, and not because people have values with which we categorically disagree, values that we couldn't possibly tolerate or entertain under any circumstances. These are values we might very easily entertain under other circumstances, and we need to train ourselves to tolerate an opinion that is different from ours by recognizing that it might not be my opinion, but it is a valid opinion. And more importantly, to recognize that the other person has a valid right to an opinion, even an opinion I consider wrong. That doesn't make the opinion categorically wrong, as long as it's not deemed wrong by the Torah, which is an absolute value, a categorical value. As long as it's just my view versus another's view, then I can consider myself right and the other wrong, but that doesn't make it so. I can take pride in my view and I can even debate it and argue for it, but that doesn't give me the right to demean the other person's view. Because by demeaning that view, I demean the person. They tell a joke about a couple who were both medical professionals. One was a psychiatrist and the other was a proctologist. Well, the husband and wife decided it would be a waste of resources to have two different offices, that they would join and they would have a single office and they would have a single secretary and collaborate that way. But they tried to figure out what name to give the office. They were trying all these different names for trying them on for size. They were trying highs and lows. They had all these different options and nothing just seemed to work. And finally they settled on odds and ends. Odds for the psychiatry and ends for the proctologist. And that worked, odds and ends. You know what? Our society is made up of odds and ends. Anyone who doesn't agree with me is odd. That's the way we think. We need to recognize that that's not the case. Oddity is not anyone who's different from me. If you think about the word we use for the norm, for normal, normal means the norm in our society. Anyone who's different from the norm is abnormal. That's a terrible categorical judgment call, because you can be different from the norm and you can be entirely right, and yet the norm will call you abnormal. That's a terrible place to be. So Rabbi Akiva, one of the great ancient sages, had 24,000 students, and they all died in a very brief 33-day period, a period that went from the second day of Passover until the 18th day of the month of Iyar. We are currently in the third day of that period. It is the period of the count of the Omer. Why did they die? They died because each one had their own way of understanding their teacher, Rabbi Akiva's teachings, and they disagreed with the others. In and of itself, that wouldn't be so bad. But they disrespected the other for having a different opinion. That's where they went wrong. You don't just disrespect their opinion when you disrespect the opinion, you disrespect them. There is a respectful way to disagree with someone. Even when you have to discuss the issue of disagreement, there is a respectful way to do so. So the first point that we made was judge favorably. Don't disagree with the person, just disagree with the opinion. The second point that we made was try and find subjects on which you have common ground and you agree. And the third point we're saying is that when you have to talk about an opinion that you disagree with, there's no reason to avoid it if you need to talk about it, but there is a way to do so respectfully, respecting the person's validity and respecting the fact that they might be right even though I don't think so. Rabbi Akiva's students didn't have that ability. Each one thought they have the window on the truth and the others are wrong. And they had this terrible plague among them in punishment for being unable to tolerate each other's opinion. Now, why was that the case? Rabbi Akiva's students, they were great Torah sages. Didn't they know better? Why was this the case? Well, the answer is really obvious. Excuse me, please don't interrupt now. Close the door. Rabbi Akiva was the sage who taught Ahavat Yisrael, the love of the Jewish people. He taught his students to love one another. They loved each other so much that they found it difficult to respect each other. What do we mean by that? Well, it's very easy to respect a stranger when you disagree with them. You can be polite to a stranger. It's so much harder to respect your own sibling when you disagree with them. With your sibling, you want to be honest. You want to make it real. With your sibling, it has to be authentic, right? So you are inclined to give them a piece of your mind. And that ends up tearing everything apart. And why do you want to give them a piece of your mind? Because you love them so much, you want to set them straight. That's where Rabbi Akiva's students went wrong. They loved each other so much they felt the need to set each other straight. If I love you, I can't just stand by, live and let live, and watch you go off in the wrong direction. I have to correct you. But I love you so much that I can't respect you enough to recognize that your opinion might actually be right for you. As long as it's all within the broad tent of Torah-sanctioned ideas, and they all were authentic students of Rabbi Akiva, then their opinion might have been right for them, and it might even be right for me if I actually look at it sincerely and honestly. And that's something they were lacking. They loved each other too much. They were too close to be able to take an honest, respectful look at the other person's opinion. Sometimes you can smother a person to love. You can smother a person with love, and you can smother them to death. That's sometimes what happens within a family when there's disagreement. So if Rabbi Akiva's students were guilty of disrespecting each other, it was because they loved each other so much. It's much easier to respect a stranger than it is to respect our own family. In Israel, all Israelis know that when it comes to fighting a external enemy, whether it's Syria, whether it's Lebanon, whether it's Al Qaeda, they're always going to have common cause. There will be unity in Israel against an external enemy. But when there's peace on the outside, then there is incredible divisiveness and discord on the inside. There was an op-ed once in the Ma'ariv newspaper in Israel that said, "We will survive Iran. We might not survive the inner schism between the religious and the not yet religious in Israel." Because when it's family, it really hurts. When it's family, it touches a raw nerve within us, and we feel the need to set the family straight. We love them so much that it's much harder to stand back and respect them. Sometimes you can respect another person to death when they want to jump off the bridge and you say, "I respect your opinion and you're right, and go ahead and jump. I don't love you enough to save you." But sometimes we can love a person to death. And that's when we disrespect them and disrespect their opinions in the process. When we disrespect their opinions and we disrespect them in the process. And then it's a terrible situation. It's pretty much why civil wars are always the most heinous wars. Civil wars are very often more violent than wars a country fights against another country. Because when a brother has turned against me, we feel betrayed. It is true, on the other hand, when we take captive soldiers from a civil war, we tend to treat them nicely because they are also citizens of our country, though we are at war at the moment. But the war itself is often very destructive. Rabbi Josh Gordon, very, very well beloved and well known rabbi in Encino, California. He gave daily teachings on Chabad.org, which are available still today for those who haven't yet had an opportunity to enjoy his teachings. Rabbi Josh Gordon of blessed memory tells a story that when he first opened his Chabad house in the San Fernando Valley, he walked down the street with his beard and his hat, and he was very demonstrably Orthodox. And a Jewish lady came and said, "What are you doing here? Why are the Orthodox coming here? Go back to Fairfax." Fairfax Avenue is the religious neighborhood. What was her issue? She was concerned. She was concerned that if the Orthodox are coming to the valley, then it's going to make her look different from everyone else around her. And maybe they will discriminate against her because she had been doing a good job assimilating and blending in with the common culture. If a Greek Orthodox priest would walk down the street, she wouldn't scream at him, "Go back to Greece." She wouldn't scream at him, "Get out of San Fernando Valley," because it doesn't reflect on her. But when it's someone from the tribe, someone close to me, that behaves in a way that I can't sanction, I can't tolerate, I don't want to be caught up in that. I don't want to be blamed. I don't want to be brushed by the same tar. I don't want to be brushed by the same paint. I don't want to be held to blame, held to account for their opinions. Then it's hard for me to be respectful. It's very hard for me to simply live and let live, or to focus on the things that we agree with because it's too close for comfort. This is where it becomes very, very important for us to maintain the respect that we need in order to get along with people we disagree with or disagree with us. There's another very well-known story about a rabbi. I won't say a name because the story is told about many, many rabbis. But a rabbi was on a train, and he had a beard, and he had a hat, and he had side locks, the payas. And a secular Jew came up to him and said, "It's because of Jews like you who who dress like people did so many hundreds of years ago, that Jews like me get judged for being for being archaic." So the rabbi looked at him and said, "Excuse me, I think you assume that I'm Jewish, but in fact I have a beard because I'm Amish." And immediately the fellow who had antagonized him turned his entire demeanor, and he said, "You know what? I have so much respect for the Amish. They respect tradition. They live according to the ancient values. They have a respect for their culture, and they have a determination and a pride not to assimilate within the common culture. I really admire the Amish." And the rabbi then chuckled and says, well, the truth is I'm actually Jewish. You were right the first time. But why is it easier to respect the Amish for their traditions and harder to respect the Jews? Very simply, because it doesn't hurt me to acknowledge that the Amish are doing something special by respecting their tradition. But it hurts me to respect that Jews are doing something special by respecting their tradition, because then I look like them. And I have to ask myself, why don't I respect my tradition? It hurts when it's close, and that's why it's so hard to respect. We need to learn to respect even when we are so close. I want to point out that the Torah has always been incredibly respectful about all things. For example, wherever the Torah talks about something that isn't pleasant, the Torah does its best to express it in the most respectful way possible. For example, when the Torah speaks of an animal that is not kosher, the Torah doesn't say an animal that is treif. The Torah says an animal that is not pure. Goes around not to say something negative, but to say the absence of a positive. When Jacob married two wives, one was Rachel, the other was Leah, and he liked Rachel more than he liked Leah, the Torah says God saw that Leah was hated. God can feel it when we discriminate against one over another. Leah wasn't hated, but the way she felt made her feel hated, and God could tell, God could sense the feelings of the person we discriminate against. The Torah tells us that we should respect our elders. It's not just the great sages who are our elders, any person who is elderly. Why do we respect our elders? Whether they are proper or improper, the fact is they have lived many, many years and they have many, many life experiences. So whether we agree with their experiences or not, we respect them for having had those experiences. They have something that we don't have. The Torah tells us to respect animals. The Torah tells us not to be cruel to animals. And so how much more certain that we have to be respectful of people. There is a story that is told in the memoirs of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. It is about a fellow who lived about 250 years ago. His name was Chaim Shaul. Chaim Shaul was a very sensitive soul. He was very sensitive to other people. He was even sensitive to animals. But it wasn't like that when he was a child. In fact, on one occasion, his father caught him throwing pebbles at the turkeys just for fun to make them squawk and run. His father called him in, and it gave him a piece of his mind. And his father told him that this is incredibly insensitive and disrespectful. And how could you behave this way towards God's creatures? This made such a deep impact on Chaim Shaul that he turned his life around. And for the rest of his life, he was known as the most sensitive person, both to animal and to humans. In fact, we even need to show sensitivity to the leaf on a tree. To tear a leaf off a tree and tear it up into tiny little bits is to destroy a life. And so in that case, to make a disparaging comment about a fellow human is to truly destroy a life. In Chabad, there's a custom on Pesach that we avoid making our matzah wet or moist. So we don't dip our matzah into soup. We don't dip our matzah into any liquids. We don't spread any kind of cream on the matzah. That's a custom in Chabad and in many other communities. At the table of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, there was a Jewish person who didn't adhere to that custom. They served beet soup, and he dipped his matzah in the beet soup. And someone made a comment that he was letting his matzah get wet. And the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe said, better a red matzah than a red face. Don't embarrass a person in public because he behaves in a way that is not consistent with your opinion. Better a red matzah than a red face. It's also important to recognize that people treat us the way we treat them. George Bernard Shaw famously said, be nice to people on your way up because you tend to meet the same people on your way back down. There are multiple stories in our rich history that demonstrate this point. I'll share one of them. There was a little child, a non-Jewish child, who was from an impoverished home. He would sit in front of the bakery and he would beg for people who came out of the bakery to give him a piece of bread. There was one Jewish rabbi, a young rabbi, His name was Rabbi Yecheskel Landau. He would give this non-Jewish child, he'd give him bread on every occasion. Sometimes even brought him into the bakery and bought a loaf of bread for him. The child really looked forward to the rabbi's visit to the bakery because the rabbi always took care of him. But the rabbi was unfortunately the only Jew in the Jewish community who looked after this non-Jewish child. All the other Jews ignored him because he's not one of ours, right? When you're not one of ours, we don't have to worry about you. Let the Gentiles take care of you. The rabbi didn't think that way. Years went on, the rabbi moved, the young child grew up and moved on, and the rabbi was now the chief rabbi of Krakow, known as the Noda B'Yehuda for the series of responsa that he wrote under that title. And word came out that a new mayor was coming to town, and that the mayor was anti-Semitic. In every city he had been before, he had issued proclamations and decrees against the Jewish community. And the community was worried. Everybody was at Twitter worrying about what's going to happen when the new mayor comes. So they put together a delegation. They formed a delegation to greet the mayor on his first day in office. And naturally, the elderly rabbi was at the head of the delegation. And when they came into the mayor's office and the mayor took one look at the rabbi, he said to the Jewish delegation, "You don't need to worry about me. You have a friend in me." They were aghast, taken aback. It's not what they had heard. So he smiled and he said, "You're right. In every other Jewish community, every other city I presided over, I was not a friend of the Jews. But I am a friend of your rabbi. You see, when I was a child, I used to beg for bread at a bakery. And he was the only Jewish person who would help me. I just recognized him as he walked in. In every other city, I couldn't stand the Jews because they disrespected me. It made me feel abandoned and it made me hate them. So I persecuted them. But now I see your rabbi leads you. You're a different kind of community. I will be your friend." This story speaks volumes. Not only cast your bread upon the waters, for with many days it will come back to you. But also, the way we treat people is the way they will treat us back. The way people treat us is always a reflection of the way we treat them. If we treat them with respect, ultimately they treat us with respect as well. So that brings us to the end of our fourth section. We talked about judging favorably. We talked about being a mensch and focusing on topics that we agree on. We talked about tolerating views and opinions that are different from ours, and we talked about treating other opinions respectfully. We now come to the final point about sometimes we should make sure that our tolerance of others doesn't lead to weakness. This is an important thing. Very often, a person who is tolerant is taken advantage of and is abused. For example, in the context of a marriage, I once heard a husband say to me, "If my wife doesn't tolerate the fact that I curse, it means that she doesn't love me. If she loved me, she would accept that that's part of who I am and I curse when I get mad." That's abusing tolerance. If his wife had shown too much tolerance until then, that's where he's demanding that her tolerance turn into a weakness. And that's absolutely wrong. That can't be allowed. Sometimes people come to their rabbi and they say, "Rabbi, if you don't change the policies that are in the synagogue that I disagree with, I'm going to walk away from the synagogue and it'll be your fault." It's not the rabbi's fault. It's the choice of the congregant. It's the congregant's choice, not the rabbi's choice. The rabbi does what the rabbi does because of what he considers right for the synagogue, and the congregant does what the congregant wants because of what the congregant considers right for the synagogue. But when I have to blame you for my choices, then I am taking advantage of your tolerance, of your respect, and I'm trying to abuse you and treat it as a weakness. We have to be careful. How do we know when we've crossed the line? When our tolerance is being abused and it's being turned into a weakness. And the answer is when it becomes painful for us. Tolerance doesn't need to be painful. Tolerance is meant to be pleasant. It's meant to feel good when we make other people feel good. if we can overcome our proclivity for arguing and for putting others down and treat them instead with respect, that's meant to make us feel good. And when instead we feel hurt, and if instead we feel taken advantage of, that means the other party is at fault and is being abusive. That's the point when we need to withdraw. It's not the point when we need to stand up and fight back. That's the point when we need to withdraw and set some boundaries. If the other person is not being tolerant, responding to my tolerance with tolerance, as most people do, but instead responding to my tolerance with belligerence, that's when I need to step back and put up boundaries. I need to say, going forward, I need to set certain conditions to our relationship because this is not acceptable. This also happens internationally. When, for example, terrorists come and attack civilians of a country and argue that they should not be persecuted because they are angry people. They should not be punished because they are angry people who have been disenfranchised and they have the right to express their rage by taking innocent lives. That's transforming tolerance into weakness. And that's also not acceptable. So tolerance also has its limitations. We are meant to be tolerant with those that are different from us and who think different from us and who behave differently from us. If we can tolerate their opinions to the extent that we can grant that they have a valid right to an opinion, and perhaps even a valid opinion if I were to examine it for myself honestly, then that's the best. If we can't grant that, at the very least, we should be able to focus on things that unite us, things that we agree with. And if we can't do that, then at least we should be able to embrace the person who holds an opinion we deem categorically wrong because they are a brother. But if we can't do any of the above and the only thing left is to talk to them respectfully about the issues we disagree with, then we need to do that only until the other person takes advantage. If they are reciprocating with tolerance and respect, then it's a lovely relationship that can flourish with no bound. If they don't reciprocate and it turns into a one-way relationship that is abusive, under those conditions, tolerance must end. So I will conclude on this note and wish us all a happy continuation of Passover. May we have a happy Pesach, a healthy Pesach, and a kosher Pesach. And may we very soon have the opportunity to practice tolerance. When we're in isolation, it's very difficult to run into others. We don't encounter others, and it's hard to practice our tolerance. May we very soon be able to come out of our homes and be together in a big tent among those we disagree with and among those with whom we do agree, and practice our tolerance. And just a quick note about this time of isolation. There is an opportunity for us to practice tolerance even during the isolation. And that is when we find people behaving in a way that we think isn't healthy distancing. We assume things about others' behavior and then we treat them like the enemy because they are a threat to our own health. When we see two people walking down the street and they are not 6 feet apart from each other, assume that they are in the same household before we jump to conclusions. Don't accuse, ask first. If we see someone who's behaving in a way that might be a threat to our health, for example, if he's standing on the line in the supermarket 6 feet away from you, but he coughs into the crook of his arm, don't treat him like a monster. He might not have the virus. He might simply have a cough. And another thing I've noticed, when we're out in public and distancing as we should, people have stopped talking to each other. They don't make eye contact. They don't say hello. They don't say goodbye, at least the people I've seen. When we are out in public, because we have to go for essential purposes, to our store, to our bank, to our pharmacy, smile at people. From a distance, greet them, be respectful. It's true that you can't get close, but remember, sometimes being close is an impediment to respect. From a distance, be friendly, be respectful, be tolerant, have a happy, have a healthy, and have a kosher Pesach. Thank you.